The city of Chicago was buzzing with tension as the trial of Officer Daniel Grayson unfolded in a crowded courtroom. Everyone had heard about the case. It was all over the news, social media, and conversations at dinner tables. Grayson, a seasoned police officer with years on the force, was accused of using excessive force against Marcus Johnson, an unarmed black man who became yet another name in a long list of troubling headlines. The details of the incident were chilling. Bodycam footage showed Grayson shouting aggressively, pinning Johnson to the ground, and deploying his taser multiple times despite no visible threat. The courtroom that day was packed. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, cameras clicked outside, and spectators whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with anger, fear, or disbelief. On one side sat Marcus Johnson's family, his mother clutching a tissue, her eyes red from days of crying. His younger sister staring blankly ahead, still trying to process what had happened. On the other side, supporters of Officer Grayson argued that he was being unfairly targeted, claiming he was just doing his job under pressure. At the center of it all was Judge Evelyn Carter, a woman known for her calm demeanor and sharp mind. She had earned respect across the city for her ability to remain fair, even when cases grew heated. But this trial felt different. From the moment opening statements began, there was an electricity in the air, a mix of anticipation and unease. Prosecutor Rachel Kim painted a vivid picture of systemic bias within law enforcement, pointing out how officers like Grayson often treated black citizens as threats without cause. Defense attorney Michael Reynolds countered by emphasizing the split-second decisions officers face daily, arguing that Grayson acted out of instinct, not malice. As witnesses took the stand, the story grew more complicated. One neighbor described hearing Marcus yell for help before the altercation, while another insisted he seemed harmless and confused. Meanwhile, internal affairs investigators revealed that Grayson had been reprimanded twice before for making racially charged comments during traffic stops. Each piece of evidence added fuel to the fire, turning the courtroom into a battleground of ideologies. But what truly set the stage for the unimaginable was the tone of the trial itself. Grayson, seated beside his lawyer, looked increasingly agitated as testimony after testimony portrayed him as reckless and prejudiced. His jaw tightened every time someone referenced the bodycam footage, which captured him calling Marcus just another thug. By the time the defense called him to the stand, the room felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Little did anyone know, the most shocking moment was yet to come, and it would leave the entire nation holding its breath. When it was finally time for Officer Daniel Grayson to take the stand, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on him as he adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, trying to appear calm. But beneath the surface, it was clear that Grayson was struggling. His hands gripped the edges of the witness box tightly, his knuckles turning white. Prosecutor Rachel Kim wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter, asking pointed questions about the night Marcus Johnson was arrested. She replayed snippets of the bodycam footage, pausing at key moments to highlight Grayson's aggressive behavior and inflammatory language. At first, Grayson answered defensively, insisting that he had followed protocol and acted in self-defense. "I don't see color," he said firmly when asked if race played a role in his decision-making. The statement drew murmurs from the crowd, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Judge Evelyn Carter leaned forward slightly in her chair, her expression unreadable but her focus sharp. When it was her turn to question Grayson, she chose her words carefully, pressing him on why he referred to Marcus as just another thug, and whether such language reflected his true feelings about black individuals. Grayson's composure began to crack under the pressure. Sweat beaded on his forehead as Judge Carter's questions grew more direct. "Do you believe your actions that night align with the values of fairness and justice this court upholds?" she asked, her tone measured but piercing. For a moment, Grayson hesitated, his lips parting as though he wanted to respond but couldn't find the right words. Then, something inside him snapped. His face flushed red, and his voice rose sharply. "You wouldn't understand," he shouted, pointing a finger at Judge Carter. "You're too close to this, too biased." The room erupted in gasps. Lawyers jumped to their feet, and spectators craned their necks to get a better view of what was happening. Judge Carter remained still, her gaze steady despite the sudden outburst. But Grayson wasn't finished. His frustration boiled over into rage as he continued yelling, accusing the judge of siding with Marcus Johnson simply because they shared the same skin color. "This isn't justice," he bellowed. "It's a witch hunt." Before anyone could react, Grayson reached for his holster. Time seemed to slow down as he pulled out his gun, the metallic gleam catching the light. He raised it without hesitation, aiming it directly at Judge Carter. The air in the courtroom turned icy cold. People froze in place, unsure if they were witnessing a nightmare come to life. A few screamed, while others instinctively ducked or shielded their faces. Lawyers scrambled under tables, and bailiffs rushed toward Grayson, their movements frantic but cautious. Judge Carter didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto Grayson's, unwavering even as the barrel of the gun loomed mere feet away. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching endlessly. No one dared to breathe. It was as if the entire world had stopped spinning, leaving only the two figures locked in an unimaginable standoff. What happened next would leave everyone stunned and change the course of the trial forever. The moment Officer Daniel Grayson pointed his gun at Judge Evelyn Carter, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air as people scrambled for cover, some diving under benches while others pressed themselves against the walls. Lawyers and spectators alike huddled together, their faces pale with fear. The sharp sound of chairs scraping against the floor mixed with panicked shouts, creating a cacophony that drowned out all sense of order. Bailiffs rushed toward Grayson, their hands reaching for their own weapons, but hesitating, unsure how to de-escalate the situation without risking disaster. In the midst of the pandemonium, Judge Carter remained eerily composed. Her posture was rigid, her shoulders squared as if bracing against an invisible storm. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on Grayson's trembling hand holding the gun. There was no trace of panic in her expression, only a quiet determination that seemed almost otherworldly. It was as though she had anticipated this moment, preparing herself for the worst long before it arrived. The contrast between her calmness and the surrounding hysteria made the scene even more surreal. "You've made your point," Judge Carter said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade slicing through fog. Her words were firm yet measured, each syllable carrying the weight of authority. "Now prove you're more than what your actions suggest." The courtroom fell silent, the tension thick enough to touch. Everyone turned to look at Grayson, whose face was a mixture of anger, confusion, and something else. Regret. Fear. Whatever it was, it caused him to falter. His grip on the gun loosened slightly, his arm wavering as doubt crept into his expression. For several agonizing seconds, time stood still. Grayson's finger hovered near the trigger, his breathing heavy and uneven. He glanced around the room, taking in the terrified faces staring back at him. The bailiffs were now closer, their movements deliberate but cautious, ready to act if necessary. Yet they held back, sensing that Judge Carter's unexpected composure might be the only thing keeping the situation from spiraling further out of control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Grayson lowered the gun. His shoulders slumped as though the fight had drained out of him, leaving behind only exhaustion and shame. A collective exhale swept through the courtroom as the immediate threat subsided, though the atmosphere remained tense. Bailiffs moved quickly to disarm him, securing the weapon before escorting him away from the stand. As he was led out, his head hung low, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Judge Carter took a deep breath, visibly steadying herself before addressing the shaken crowd. "This court will not be intimidated," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We are here to seek truth and justice, and nothing, not fear, not violence, will deter us from that purpose." Her words resonated deeply, earning murmurs of agreement from those who dared to speak again. Slowly, people began to rise from their hiding spots, brushing themselves off and exchanging wide-eyed glances. As order was gradually restored, the gravity of what had just occurred sank in. Witnesses exchanged nervous whispers, wondering how such a dramatic turn of events would impact the trial. Defense attorney Michael Reynolds sat frozen in his seat, his face pale and his mind racing. Prosecutor Rachel Kim clutched her notes tightly, her knuckles white, as she processed the enormity of the moment. And Judge Carter, though outwardly composed, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, knowing full well that this incident would leave scars far beyond the confines of the courtroom. As the bailiffs restrained Officer Daniel Grayson and led him away, the courtroom remained eerily quiet. The shock of what had just happened lingered in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on everyone present. Spectators exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Lawyers began gathering their scattered papers, their hands trembling as they tried to regain some semblance of order. But then, something unexpected happened, something that would leave an even deeper impression on those watching. Defense attorney Michael Reynolds, who had spent weeks defending Grayson's actions with unwavering conviction, suddenly stood up. His face was pale, his tie slightly askew, and his usual confident demeanor replaced by a look of profound guilt. Without saying a word, he walked toward Judge Evelyn Carter, stopping just short of her bench. For a moment, he simply stood there, his head bowed as if wrestling with his thoughts. Then, clearing his throat, he spoke in a voice so soft it forced the entire room to lean forward to hear him. "Your Honor," Reynolds began, his words halting but sincere, I failed today. Not just as a lawyer, but as a human being." The courtroom froze. Even Judge Carter looked taken aback, her brow furrowing slightly as she studied the man before her. Reynolds continued, his voice growing steadier despite the weight of his confession. "I knew who Daniel Grayson was, the kind of officer he was, and I chose to defend him anyway, knowing full well the pain his actions have caused. I told myself it was my job, that I was just doing what lawyers do. But that's no excuse." He paused, taking a shaky breath before turning to face Marcus Johnson's family, seated in the front row. They watched him warily, their expressions unreadable but tinged with suspicion. To Mr. Johnson's family, Reynolds said, his voice cracking under the strain of emotion, "I am deeply sorry. I should have done more to hold my client accountable instead of trying to justify his behavior. What you witnessed here today is unforgivable, and I share in the responsibility for allowing this to happen." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as though time itself had stopped to absorb the gravity of Reynolds' apology. Even the reporters, who moments earlier had been scribbling furiously, lowered their pens to listen intently. This was not the dramatic display of legal prowess they had come to expect from Reynolds. It was raw, unfiltered remorse. Judge Carter studied him carefully, her expression softening ever so slightly. After a long pause, she nodded. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her tone measured but compassionate, "your admission takes courage, and I commend you for it. Accountability begins with acknowledging our mistakes. Let us hope your actions moving forward reflect the sincerity of your words today." Reynolds nodded solemnly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He returned to his seat, visibly shaken but resolute. Meanwhile, Grayson, now seated in handcuffs beside a bailiff, stared at his lawyer in disbelief. For the first time since the trial began, he seemed uncertain, not just about his fate, but about the path that had brought him here. The ripple effects of Reynolds' unexpected apology were immediate. Whispers spread through the courtroom, and even the harshest critics of the defense team found themselves momentarily disarmed by the humanity of the moment. It was a stark reminder that beneath the roles people play in life, lawyer, officer, judge, they are still individuals capable of growth, regret, and change. And while it didn't undo the damage done, it offered a glimmer of hope that redemption might still be possible for everyone involved. The courtroom was still reeling from the shocking events of the day, but Judge Evelyn Carter refused to let chaos dictate the proceedings. With her voice steady and commanding, she called for order, reminding everyone that justice could not be derailed by fear or anger. "We are here to uncover the truth," she said firmly, her eyes scanning the room as if daring anyone to challenge her resolve. Slowly, the murmurs died down, and the trial resumed, though nothing about it felt normal anymore. Prosecutor Rachel Kim seized the moment, determined to ensure that the gravity of what had just occurred wasn't lost on the jury. She began presenting evidence with renewed intensity, laying out a timeline of Officer Daniel Grayson's history of misconduct. Internal affairs reports revealed multiple complaints against him over the years, many involving aggressive behavior toward black citizens during routine stops. Witnesses recounted stories of being treated like criminals simply for walking home late at night or driving in predominantly white neighborhoods. Each testimony painted a picture of an officer who saw his badge not as a symbol of service, but as a tool of authority, and one who wielded it recklessly. Defense attorney Michael Reynolds sat quietly beside Grayson, no longer offering objections or counterarguments. His earlier apology seemed to have stripped him of his usual confidence, leaving him visibly shaken. At times, he glanced toward Marcus Johnson's family, perhaps searching for forgiveness in their expressions, but all he found were stony faces filled with pain and distrust. For the first time in his career, Reynolds appeared unsure of his role, torn between loyalty to his client and the moral weight of what had transpired. Meanwhile, Grayson himself seemed smaller somehow, slouched in his chair with his head bowed. Gone was the defiant posture he had displayed earlier. Now, he looked like a man grappling with the consequences of his actions. The cold reality of his situation was sinking in. The gun incident, the national spotlight, the mounting evidence, all of it pointed toward an outcome he couldn't escape. Yet, even as guilt crept into his demeanor, there was also defiance flickering in his eyes, as though he believed this was all part of some grand conspiracy against him. Judge Carter listened intently to every word spoken, her expression unreadable, but her focus razor-sharp. When it came time for closing arguments, she allowed both sides ample opportunity to make their cases. Prosecutor Kim delivered a passionate plea for accountability, urging the jury to see beyond the uniform and recognize the harm caused by unchecked prejudice. "This isn't just about one officer," she emphasized. "It's about a system that allows such behavior to persist without consequence." Reynolds, when it was his turn, offered a subdued defense. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges while subtly shifting the narrative to focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. It was clear he was trying to salvage something from the wreckage, not just for Grayson, but perhaps for himself as well. As the day drew to a close, Judge Carter instructed the jury to deliberate carefully, reminding them of their duty to uphold justice impartially. The jurors filed out silently, each carrying the burden of deciding Grayson's fate. Back in the courtroom, tension hung thick in the air. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail for the evening news, while Marcus Johnson's family held hands tightly, praying for closure. Whatever verdict awaited, one thing was certain: lives would be changed forever. And so too might the way society viewed accountability within law enforcement. Officer Daniel Grayson sat alone in a dimly lit holding cell, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. The echoes of the courtroom, the gasps, the shouts, the stunned silence, replayed endlessly in his mind. He couldn't escape the image of Judge Evelyn Carter staring at him, her unwavering gaze piercing through his anger and fear. For the first time in his life, Grayson felt truly vulnerable. His hands trembled as he clasped them together, trying to steady himself, but the guilt and shame were relentless. It was late when defense attorney Michael Reynolds arrived, his face pale and drawn. He had spent hours grappling with his own conscience after publicly apologizing in court, and now he carried a sense of urgency that even Grayson could sense. "Daniel," Reynolds began, his voice low but firm, "you're standing at a crossroads. You can either dig yourself deeper into this hole or take a step toward making things right." Grayson looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "I'm already done for." Reynolds shook his head, pulling up a chair to sit closer. "Not yet," he said. "You still have a chance to show the world, and yourself, that you're more than your worst moment. If you cooperate fully with investigators, if you testify against other officers involved in similar misconduct, it could make a difference. Not just for you, but for the system itself." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. At first, Grayson resisted. "They'll crucify me," he muttered, his voice tinged with bitterness. "The department will never let me live this down." But Reynolds pressed on, appealing to whatever shred of humanity remained within the man. "Think about Marcus Johnson's family," he urged. "Think about all the people who've been hurt because no one held anyone accountable. This is bigger than you, Daniel. It's your chance to do something meaningful." For hours, they talked, arguing, reflecting, debating. Slowly, reluctantly, Grayson began to see the truth in Reynolds' words. He thought about the lives he'd impacted, not just Marcus Johnson's but countless others whose stories had gone untold. And he realized that running from accountability wouldn't erase what he'd done. It would only prolong the pain. By the time the sun began to rise outside the small window of the holding cell, Grayson made a decision. He would cooperate. News of his agreement sent shockwaves through the city. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Critics questioned whether Grayson's cooperation was genuine or merely an act of self-preservation, while supporters of police reform saw it as a rare opportunity to expose systemic issues long buried beneath layers of denial. Internal affairs investigators worked tirelessly, using Grayson's testimony to build cases against several high-ranking officers implicated in misconduct. As details emerged, public outrage grew. Community leaders organized rallies, demanding transparency and change. Social media buzzed with hashtags calling for justice, and protests erupted across the country. What started as a single trial had become a catalyst for national conversations about policing, accountability, and racial bias. Grayson's name became synonymous with both infamy and reluctant redemption, a symbol of how far someone must fall before choosing to rise again. But for Grayson himself, the road ahead was anything but easy. Every interview, every confession weighed heavily on him, forcing him to confront the darkest parts of himself. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there were moments of clarity, glimmers of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to make amends. Whether society would forgive him remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Daniel Grayson's choice to speak out marked the beginning of a journey toward healing, not just for him, but for everyone affected by the scars of injustice. The day of the verdict arrived, and the courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters lined the walls, their cameras ready to capture every reaction. Marcus Johnson's family sat in the front row, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. Supporters of police reform filled the benches, clutching signs that read "Justice for All," while a smaller group of Grayson's supporters whispered prayers under their breath. The air was thick with anticipation, each person silently wondering whether justice would truly be served. When the jury entered the room, their expressions gave nothing away. Judge Evelyn Carter instructed them to deliver the verdict, and the foreman stood, his voice steady as he read the decision. Guilty on all counts. The room erupted. Cheers broke out among Marcus's family and supporters, tears streaming down their faces as they hugged one another. For them, this wasn't just a victory for one case, it was a step toward holding law enforcement accountable. On the other side, Grayson's supporters sat in stunned silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Carter called for order once again, her gavel striking the bench with authority. As the noise subsided, she addressed Grayson directly. "Mr. Grayson," she began, her tone firm but not unkind, "your actions have caused irreparable harm, not only to Marcus Johnson and his family, but also to the trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. However, your recent cooperation with investigators demonstrates a willingness to take responsibility. That will be taken into consideration during sentencing." She paused, looking around the room before continuing. "This court believes in accountability, but it also believes in rehabilitation. You will serve a reduced prison sentence followed by mandatory counseling sessions focused on addressing bias and prejudice. Additionally, you will participate in community service programs designed to rebuild trust with those affected by police misconduct." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some cheered at the judge's balanced approach, while others grumbled that the punishment wasn't severe enough. Outside the courthouse, news crews scrambled to capture reactions. Marcus's mother spoke briefly to reporters, her voice trembling but resolute. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about making sure no family has to go through what we've been through. We want change, not just for us, but for everyone." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations nationwide about systemic reform within policing. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Grayson was escorted away, his head bowed. Though relieved that his cooperation had softened his sentence, he knew the hardest part lay ahead. Rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, and many doubted whether someone like him could ever truly change. But for the first time, Grayson seemed willing to try. As he boarded the transport van, he glanced back at the crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Their faces, angry, hopeful, skeptical, stayed with him, a reminder of the work he had ahead. Back inside, Judge Carter took a moment to reflect before adjourning the court. She understood the verdict wouldn't satisfy everyone, but it represented something greater, a shift toward accountability and healing. This case had exposed deep wounds in society, but it also offered a chance to begin mending them. As she left the bench, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile but powerful belief that even in moments of darkness, humanity could find a way forward. The ripple effects of the trial spread far beyond Chicago. Lawmakers began drafting legislation aimed at increasing transparency within police departments. Community leaders organized workshops to bridge divides between officers and citizens. And slowly, conversations shifted from anger to action, proving that justice, when pursued honestly, could spark meaningful change. Months after the trial, the city of Chicago, and much of the nation, was still grappling with its aftermath. The case of Officer Daniel Grayson had become a symbol of both failure and hope, a stark reminder of the deep-rooted issues within law enforcement, while also offering a glimpse of what accountability could look like. For Judge Evelyn Carter, the experience had been transformative. She found herself invited to speak at conferences, town halls, and universities about criminal justice reform, her words carrying the weight of someone who had stared into the eye of chaos and emerged with clarity. Standing before a packed auditorium at one such event, Judge Carter began her speech by recounting the harrowing day when Grayson pointed a gun at her in court. "That moment wasn't just about me," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "It was about all of us. The fear, the anger, the mistrust that has built up over generations. But it also showed us something else, our capacity to confront hate and choose a different path." Her audience listened intently, hanging on every word as she emphasized the importance of empathy, honesty, and courage in creating real change. Meanwhile, Grayson's journey toward redemption was anything but easy. Released from prison after serving part of his sentence, he began working with youth programs aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At first, his presence sparked protests, with some parents refusing to let their children participate in events where he was involved. But Grayson persisted, showing up week after week despite the hostility. Slowly, his efforts began to make an impact. During one session, a young boy asked him why he chose to help now. Grayson hesitated, then admitted, "Because I got it wrong before, and because I want to prove that people can change if they're willing to do the work." Back in the courtroom, Judge Carter continued presiding over cases, her reputation stronger than ever. Yet she carried the scars of that fateful trial, a lingering awareness of how close violence had come to shattering the rule of law. Still, she remained steadfast in her belief that justice required patience and perseverance. We cannot erase centuries of harm overnight, she often reminded colleagues and citizens alike. But we can choose to face it head-on, together. As for Marcus Johnson's family, they channeled their pain into advocacy. They founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of police brutality and pushing for policy changes. Their mission resonated deeply, drawing volunteers and donors from across the country. Marcus's younger sister became a vocal advocate, speaking passionately at rallies and sharing her brother's story so others wouldn't forget him or the lessons his death had taught them. Nationwide, the ripple effects of the trial continued to unfold. Lawmakers passed new measures requiring body cameras for all officers and mandating regular bias training. Police departments implemented stricter oversight committees, giving civilians more power to hold officers accountable. While critics argued these steps were only the beginning, few could deny that progress was being made, one small step at a time. In the end, the story of Officer Daniel Grayson and Judge Evelyn Carter served as a turning point, a moment when society was forced to confront uncomfortable truths and decide which direction to take. It was messy, imperfect, and far from over. But amidst the scars and struggles, there were signs of healing. People were talking, listening, and working together in ways they hadn't before. Justice, as Judge Carter often reminded everyone, wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And though the road ahead remained long, the seeds of change had been planted, promising a brighter future for those brave enough to nurture them.